Patrick, who usually avoids wasting money, was surprisingly spending on fortune-telling apps. I thought it was adorable that he relied on horoscopes. We had been struggling to have children, so I suggested that we seek medical treatment. Suddenly, Patrick said, "We shouldn't believe everything we read online. Let's get our fortunes told first." His fondness for fortune-telling leading to such a situation was something I never could have imagined. My name is Lisa. I am 33 and married to Patrick. We met at a pub. I was dining with a friend, and we were both quite drunk. Our conversation was all about romance. "I'm already in my late 20s and still haven't met my Prince Charming," I lamented. After graduating from college and starting work, I hadn't met any impressive men. My peers were getting married and having babies. Hearing about it made me think it was about time to consider marriage myself. During our conversation about the ideal man, my friend said, "A man who doesn't cheat and has a job is enough for me." But I had endless ideals, wanting him to be older than me, employed, kind, a leader, and handsome. That's probably why I never had a boyfriend. But another non-negotiable for me was that I loved children. I knew I definitely wanted to have kids after getting married. As we listed these ideals, we, both single, were commiserating with each other. We talked until the pub closed and then went our separate ways. As I walked home alone, someone suddenly called out from behind, "Excuse me, I was sitting next to you at the pub." My name is Patrick. I was startled to see a confident, handsome man who was exactly my type standing in front of me. The surprise sobered me up. However, I hadn't really noticed the person sitting next to me at the pub. "Sorry, I wasn't really paying attention to the next seat." "It's okay, I didn't mean to scare you," Patrick said, apologetically. He then shyly added, "I happened to overhear your conversation and thought maybe we might get along. So I decided to take a chance and speak up." Was our conversation really heard so clearly? I felt embarrassed as I looked closely at Patrick. While he was certainly my type, I was initially cautious because he had approached me so suddenly. It turned out we were headed in the same direction, so we started talking as we walked. I learned that Patrick was 5 years my senior and worked at a certain company. He also seemed interested in having children and was thinking about marriage but hadn't found the right person. Maybe this is some kind of fate. "Would you like to start out as friends?" he suggested. After chatting for a bit, I saw nothing suspicious about Patrick. He seemed like a normal person. As I was pondering what to do, he handed me something. It was his business card. It had his workplace and real name on it, just as he had mentioned earlier. Such openness suggested he was sincere. Rather than letting go of this rare encounter, I decided to go with the flow and took up Patrick's offer. Thus began our interactions. We went on classic dates like dining, visiting aquariums, and watching movies. Despite being older, Patrick was easy to talk to and being together was never tiring. He seemed to like children, smiling at babies we saw at the shopping mall and never frowning at noisy kids. I began to wonder how such a wonderful person could still be single, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him. After several months of dating, we decided to enter into a relationship with marriage in mind, as we both had a desire to settle down. About a year after we started dating, we got married. Living together made coming home something I looked forward to, even when I was tired from work. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone because Patrick was there. Eating and watching TV with him was far more enjoyable than being alone. Patrick was a great cook, often busier in the kitchen than I was. preparing balanced and delicious meals. His cooking was so good that it seemed like he could open his own restaurant. I was so happy that I ended up eating too much and gained a significant amount of weight after getting married. But even then, Patrick would say, "You're cute no matter what," which made me fall for him even more. People often say that living together reveals the unpleasant sides of your partner. But I never felt dissatisfied with Patrick. Instead, I sometimes wondered, is he really okay with someone like me? To me, he was the perfect husband. Only after living together did I discover how much Patrick loves fortune-telling. Every morning, he checks his phone immediately after waking up. It seems he's looking up his horoscope for the day. I'm the type who doesn't believe in such things. I often see horoscopes on TV and think, how can people with the same zodiac sign all have the same fortune? It appears Patrick doesn't mind spending money on this, as he subscribes to paid fortune-telling apps. I thought of his interest in fortune-telling as just a hobby, since he doesn't gamble or smoke and doesn't have expensive hobbies. I thought a little spending on his horoscope apps was harmless. Additionally, when his fortune was poor, Patrick followed the advice from his horoscopes, which I found oddly endearing. He would even wear orange socks, a complete mismatch with his suit, which almost made me laugh, but seeing how it boosted his motivation, I held back any comments. He would tell me things like, "You should eat this today," or "Look to the west before you go to sleep." I thought these suggestions were silly and doubted they could really change our luck. But Patrick's earnest belief in them made him seem quite adorable. He even uses Chinese geomancy called feng shui for decorating our home, something I have no interest in, so I've left it all to him. The layout changes frequently with his luck, which has become another thing to look forward to. After about 2 years of marriage, I began to think, it's strange that Patrick and I haven't had children yet. We weren't actively trying, but I thought children would come naturally as we lived as a couple. However, I was already 30 years old then. I wanted several children and felt it was about time for our first. So, I suggested to Patrick, should we start trying for a baby? He seemed positive about it, saying, "Yeah, we've had enough time as a couple, and I do want kids too." Relieved by his response, I showed him a famous fertility clinic near our house on my phone, suggesting we could visit it together. Suddenly, Patrick's expression darkened as he asked incredulously, "A hospital? To have children?" I was taken aback by his reaction, having assumed that after 2 years without natural conception, it was time to take the next step. But it seemed Patrick had never considered going to a hospital. I tried to reassure him, it's shocking to think about a hospital suddenly. But I read online that it's good to consult a doctor if you haven't conceived naturally after a year. To this, Patrick replied, "We shouldn't believe everything we read online. Let's get our fortunes told first." I thought it ironic that he dismissed online information yet was quick to trust online horoscopes. Peeking over his shoulder, I saw him browsing through a paid fortune-telling app. He mentioned that with an additional fee, we could have a session with a fortune teller online. I found myself at a loss for words. Patrick seemed so caught up in fortune-telling that nothing I said would sway him. Yet, he was also looking up recipes for fertility-enhancing foods for me. Though I had my doubts about relying on fortune-telling instead of medical advice, seeing his efforts made me consider listening to the fortune teller just this once. Then, the day of our fortune-telling session arrived. An online fortune teller was to make various judgments based on our birth dates and overall vibes. I had never consulted a fortune teller before, so I just answered the questions as asked. To my surprise, the fortune teller said, "You will conceive soon. I can see a baby coming your way." Patrick, reassured by these words, embraced me, saying, "See? We don't need to go to a hospital, do we?" Internally, I wondered how soon that would be but resigned myself with the thought. If fortune-telling could truly predict such things, there would be no struggle. Then Patrick asked, eyes sparkling, "How many children will we have?" The fortune-teller's response was. This answer felt vague to me, and I found myself feeling quite cynical. Despite my growing skepticism, I knew arguing wouldn't change Patrick's faith in the fortune-teller's words. So I remained silent. Patrick eagerly asked, "Will we have a daughter?" I definitely want a daughter. This was the first time I realized he specifically wanted a girl. Surprised by his definite wish, I listened as the fortune-teller promised, "It will be as you wish." Could it mean that I would have a daughter? As I pondered this, the fortune-telling session came to an end. Immediately after hanging up, Patrick boasted, "There's no need for a hospital. Didn't the fortune-teller say we would conceive soon?" But I couldn't help but retort. They said we'd conceive, but they didn't say we wouldn't need a hospital. Patrick looked displeased by my words. I asked him, "What does soon mean to you?" After a moment's hesitation, he answered, "Maybe in 6 months." So, I somewhat forcefully made a promise with him. If we don't have a child in 6 months, we'll go to the clinic together. As we approached the 6-month mark, Patrick tried everything from feng shui to recommended supplements to increase our chances of conception. I appreciated his efforts and hoped for a child soon. However, 6 months passed without us conceiving, and as promised, we visited the clinic. After various tests, it was revealed that the fertility issues were with Patrick. I can't believe it's my fault. The fortune-teller never mentioned this. He relied on fortune-telling even then. There was no time to dwell on blame. We proceeded with IVF. There were tough times during the tests and treatments. I truly felt the burden that pregnancy places on a woman. At 32, I finally became pregnant. We hugged and cried with joy when the treatment succeeded. A few weeks later, we learned I was expecting triplets. Although I had wanted several children, becoming the mother of 3 at once was beyond my expectations. Before I could bask in the joy, the morning sickness began. Again, Patrick started talking about fortune-telling. But morning sickness isn't something that can be managed by that. Overwhelmed by the nausea, I grew increasingly irritated whenever Patrick mentioned his horoscopes. Then we learned the gender of the children, all boys. Patrick was visibly disappointed, muttering, "Why all boys? Couldn't one of them be a girl with 3 in there?" It's natural to have hopes for a child's gender, but just having children was a miracle for us. Not knowing yet if they would be born healthy, I couldn't understand his fixation on their gender. I tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Maybe they'll turn out to be girls. Doctors can make mistakes, you know." But Patrick's expression remained unchanged. Half-jokingly, I added, "If you can't believe it, why don't you ask your trusted fortune-teller?" Then Patrick replied, "If the doctor said it, it must be true." Hearing this, I was dumbfounded. "If you think that, you might as well give up all your fortune-telling," I thought irritably, but I didn't have the heart to say it aloud. Then Patrick continued, "This is the worst. I didn't need 3 boys. I married you because I was told she could have girls." I was stunned by his words. "What do you mean?" I have a body that can bear girls. Was that something a fortune teller told you? And you had me checked before we married? When did you have me fortune told? I confronted Patrick, shaken. He confessed. At the pub where we met, I had a fortune teller. Introduced by a friend, predict my future spouse. Then they started saying that the woman next to me was my destiny. And that she would bear the daughters I desire. According to Patrick, the fortune teller had recommended me as a suitable spouse just because I was sitting next to him. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. You were just deceived by a shady fortune teller, I snapped. At that time, I was drinking and talking loudly. Since I was discussing a desire to marry, the fortune teller must have overheard and used that to his advantage. Patrick then retorted even more vehemently, I paid $5,000, so it must be true. $5,000? No fortune teller at the pub would charge that much. And it's ridiculous to spend that much on fortune telling in the first place. I couldn't believe Patrick had spent $5,000 on fortune telling. My shock and anger surpassed, and I was left speechless. During a few minutes of silence, a sudden sharp pain hit my stomach. Ouch, it hurts. I cried out, doubling over in pain. Patrick, flustered, frantically tried to soothe my back. Unable to bear the pain, I asked him to call an ambulance. I was quickly taken to a large hospital and ended up being admitted. With only a few months left until delivery, I was forced into a managed hospital stay. My time in the hospital before giving birth was tense due to the atmosphere between Patrick and me. He seemed significantly upset that our babies were boys. Although he brought me things, he avoided asking about the children. Yet, the fact that he visited me meant he was concerned, even if he didn't voice it. Patrick can manage the house even if I'm not there. He must be continuing with his daily routines. I shouldn't worry. I reassured myself. Without ever being discharged, I gave birth to triplet boys. The labor came on suddenly, and I couldn't contact Patrick in time. The nurses later reached him, and he came to the hospital as soon as he could. While waiting for him, I looked at our newborn sons and was overwhelmed with emotion. This moment I had long awaited. My precious treasures had arrived all at once. The newborns were incredibly cute. Though Patrick had desperately wanted a daughter. I hoped seeing our 3 boys would change his heart. I eagerly imagined a happy life with our family of 5 while waiting for him to arrive. However, when Patrick arrived, his first words were, "So, they are all boys? Why couldn't there be at least one girl?" As he stared at the boys, a nurse came to take them for a test. "Maybe they'll switch one for a girl when they come back," Patrick said absurdly, which made me snap. Enough. I just risked my life to bring 3 boys into the world, and that's your first comment? I can't believe you're still fixated on their gender. I burst out in anger. Yet my words seemed to have no effect on him. Suddenly, he looked relieved, as if he had accepted the situation. However, he then said something unexpected. "Right, boys can't turn into girls. Actually, I was told by a fortune teller that it's best to divorce a wife who can't have girls as soon as possible." I was speechless. He continued without giving me a chance to speak. And that I should remarry quickly. "So, I've already started looking for a new wife, someone who can have girls, of course." He was lively as he spoke, seemingly revitalized by his decision. I was overwhelmed by the continuous stream of shocking statements, struggling to keep up. Unperturbed by my reaction. "I've indeed met my destined partner, and she's already pregnant with a girl. So, Lisa, I want a divorce now. You'll just have to raise the 3 boys on your own, he added. Shockingly, Patrick had been searching for a new wife, relying on fortune-telling while I was hospitalized. He was asking for a divorce because his new girlfriend was pregnant, which was outrageous. My anger surged as I yelled, "Stop joking. Stop relying on fortune-telling and take responsibility for the life you chose." However, Patrick replied, "Yes, this is my life. I have the right to choose." Then he rummaged through his bag and handed me a pen and paper. What? A divorce form? I was astonished. Patrick had handed me a completed divorce form. While I was still unable to grasp the situation, he said, "If you send it to me, I'll submit it," and left the room. Tears streamed down my face as I was left alone. How can we divorce when I have to raise 3 sons? Yet, I gripped the pen tightly and filled out my section. Yes, I needed to be stronger now more than ever. With 3 children to raise, I had no time for tears. I no longer needed a husband like that. I washed my face and shifted my focus. Just then, the children were brought back into the room. I won't lose. I will definitely make these boys happy, I vowed to myself. Thus began the tumultuous journey of raising 3 boys. Raising them simultaneously proved to be immensely challenging. The stress perhaps caused my health to deteriorate, and my discharge from the hospital was delayed. I had been using a private room but had to move to a general ward. The divorce form, still in my bag, remained unsubmitted. Ultimately, I stayed in the hospital for about a month until the children's weight reached the standard for discharge and my postpartum condition improved. On the day I was to be discharged, a new patient moved into the bed next to mine. Her face was hidden behind a curtain, but it seemed she had given birth that day. As I was preparing to leave, a man hurried into her space. "Congratulations on the birth. Thank you for giving birth to my precious little girl." Before he finished speaking, the woman shouted in a frightened voice, "Oh no! Who are you?" Surprised by the commotion, I impulsively opened the curtain next to me. And there was Patrick, unaware of my presence, his face pale as he stared at the baby. "Hey, why are you here?" The woman, holding the baby protectively, was visibly wary of Patrick as he stammered, "This isn't my child." From the situation, I deduced this woman was the destined person Patrick had mentioned. "What? I never took you seriously, it was just a fling." It seemed Patrick was the only one who believed it was destiny. I almost laughed, holding back with great effort. Listening to their conversation, I learned her name was Emma. Emma and Patrick had been involved just once, but Patrick, possibly spurred on by another fortune-teller, had seriously thought she was the one. Patrick had been persistently messaging Emma, but she had been rejecting him. "By the way, why do you know I was giving birth?" Emma asked, visibly uncomfortable. Patrick replied wide-eyed. "You posted it in detail on social media. About your labor pains and how lonely it was to go through it alone. So I came to support you." Emma raised her voice, "That wasn't meant for you. It was for my husband abroad." I glanced at the baby and sensed that she indeed wasn't Patrick's child. The baby didn't take after Patrick at all. I thought Emma's husband was really a foreigner. Yet, Patrick was still not ready to give up, insisting, "Emma, the mother of a girl, is my destiny." Emma quietly responded with a straight face, "This child is a boy, though." Patrick, shocked, stared intently at the birth card attached to the boy's bed, which clearly read gender, male. Realizing the truth, Patrick slumped to the floor. Just then, security arrived due to the disturbance and detained Patrick. Finally noticing me, Patrick made a ridiculous suggestion. "Let's start over. You're my true destined person, not like the fortune said." Annoyed, I retorted, "You're not needed, and you're definitely not my destiny," and left the room. My discharge procedures were already completed, and my parents, who had come to pick me up, had the children ready in the car. We then went straight to the law office to submit the divorce form that had been lingering in my bag. Patrick was questioned by the police upon his return home. It seems he no longer believed in anything, having given up his beloved fortune-telling. All that remained for Patrick were significant debts incurred for fortune-telling and child support for 3 children. He had subscribed to multiple paid apps and visited several expensive fortune-tellers face-to-face. Overwhelmed with debt, Patrick pleaded, "I can't pay the child support. Besides, I didn't want boys." However, he needed to take responsibility seriously. Though he didn't regard them as his own, the children were undoubtedly his and mine. Despite our divorce, Patrick had a duty to support them, and I intended to make sure he worked hard and paid properly. Emma was scolded severely by her foreign husband after her affair with Patrick came to light. She had wanted to stay and raise her child in the States, but without guarantees against further infidelity, her husband wouldn't allow it. And she is now striving to bring up her child in an unfamiliar foreign land. As for me, I returned to my parents' home to struggle through raising 3 children. I hadn't planned to rely on my family, but they welcomed me without a word when I contacted them right after giving birth. As I raise my children, I am constantly grateful to my parents who raised me. I am determined to keep looking forward and raise my children to be proud.